All right. I'm going to hand it off to Rick and Ralph. You guys can take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris, and great to have you here. And Ralph, I'm thinking the last time maybe you and I were up here was a little bit about the State of the Church address. And today our theme is story, and about God's big story. But each of us have an individual story within that big story. And you've got a story about calling, and I know the term calling is very important to you. So why don't you share with your church family about that?
Okay, Rick, thank you. Yeah, Rick and I were talking just the other day, as were Chris and I, because I, for one, am feeling there's really there's something stirring in our church here amongst a lot of you, and certainly connecting with some of you where God seems to be calling you or moving you or nudging you, as I like to call it. And so Rick asked if I would share my story as it relates specifically to the call to an elder, because that kind of ties in with part of what we're going through right now. Because you'll see in your bulletin, we have a call for elders. And my story is a little unconventional in the sense that when I was approached to be an elder, I guess 5 years ago now, I was receptive and responsive and said, sure, send me the information I need to go through to understand what the responsibilities are. And then I will meet with the selection committee, and then I will pray about it. And so that all happened, and then something really interesting happened. A little bit of background, I've come from a couple of other churches where I was not only an elder, I'd been a deacon. A deacon?
I think the word is deacon, yeah.
We'll talk about that another time. And a deacon, too. And the chair of the council, as we called it there. And so I thought, well, sure, can I do this? I thought, yeah, I can do this. But here was the difference, folks. I was really wanting to not do it for myself, but I was really looking for the call. And wanted to know if there was one. And the interesting thing, as some of you know, because you were part of my story back then, was I had a very strong sense from God that it was no. And it was really unsettling, actually, because the image that I had, and I shared this with you, Rick, and with Pastor Phil at the time, was, as I pray, I'm more of a visual. Those of you that know me, you know that's kind of my MO. And I saw God turn his back to me. That was because as I was praying about this, and it was, I don't know about any of you, but if you see God turn his back on you, that's usually not a good sign. And so I thought, okay, that to me would say no, but I looked deeper. I said, okay, Lord, is there some unconfessed sin? Is there something that I don't know about that you're saying no to this for me proceeding now? And I wrestled with that for quite a while. And then even Phil and I, we met and talked. It was a very difficult time because I thought, am I not good enough? And the interesting thing, and the reason that I'm sharing this with you this morning, was that it wasn't that at all. It wasn't in God's timing. Because right after that, I stood with my decision. I said no. And then Phil moved on into another area of ministry. We looked for a new pastor, lead pastor, that's you. And I said yes, I would step up. And the next time when I was asked, and the next time, and it was interesting because I didn't need a lot of prayer, because I knew very clearly that if God was saying no, he would make it clear to me and how I needed to hear the no. That if there was the absence of that, and obviously there was still some prayer, it was now. And so my sharing this story, and why Rick and I were talking and said, Ralph, would you share this, is we're calling for elders now. And I'm wondering how many of you have been called or sense a call, and are you willing to respond? And not just say, sure, I'm in, but take that next step and get close to God. Let him work in your life and reveal to you what his plan is for you, because he has gifted you with talents and skills and abilities that he wants you to share with others. And it may not be what Rick and I do sitting up the front, like we're going to talk a bit about leadership in a moment, because really, if you think of our elders, we are called elders, but we also refer to ourselves as the leadership team, so the LT in short. And really, if you think about becoming an elder, if someone is approaching you or will be approaching you, I would encourage you in the same fashion that I did, to pray about it and be open. Don't come in with a presupposed idea of, sure, I'm on. But really out of an act of obedience, see if God is calling you into this, and then if he will gift and anoint you and use you. And if it's not now, then be open to when it might be. But God has given us all talents and abilities, right? He wants to use us, and it's a matter of obedience for us. So that's there's my story.
Yes, yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's really the key, and I think that's your heart and my heart, and our heart as elders in the church, is that each person follows their calling. So what has God called you to? and to follow in the right timing, right?
Yeah.
And it may be eldership, it may be helping in KU, it may be something in the marketplace, right? It may be something in the community that God has called. If you're a parent, God has called you to lead as a parent, you know? And so on Saturday, we're going to be doing a workshop here, and I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about that workshop. And we're not trying to raise up elders in the workshop. That may be a byproduct of it, but we are trying to raise the leadership here at the church, whatever God has called you to in whatever area, right?
Well, and Rick, you have a term, a leadership pipeline. Can you just add to that a bit, and then I'll talk a bit about how that ties into Saturday.
Yeah, so that idea that we as a disciple-making church are continually raising up leaders within our church. Again, it may be within ministry, it may be within the marketplace, in the family, whatever area, that we have this development plan in place. And what's happening Saturday is part of that strategy to ensure that that happens.
Yeah, and let me just, before you can have more, or you can get more information in the bulletin, then you obviously have Rick's contact information, and mine is in there as well if you want to email me, or if you want to talk to me about that. Oh, and the other thing before I forget is we would like to have an idea of how many people are coming. So if you are planning to attend, and if you're going to bring somebody, which we're encouraging you to do, just let us know so that we have enough cookies and cake and coffee and ice cream and whatever else we'll have, I guess. But basically, the leadership issue, now this is really serious because as the eldership team, we've gone through a book actually from Andy Stanley. Rick, you gave us that book, and we're reading through it, talking about what does it mean as a church to grow and to do life on purpose and disciple and so forth. And one of the parts of that book where Stanley writes about holy discontent, it really moved me because do I want to help lead and develop others? Absolutely, I do that. And quite frankly, I've spent probably the last decade now mentoring and coaching probably close to about 1,000 young people. And these are people in their 20s and 30s. That's kind of my day job. That's part of what I do. And that got me thinking that from your pipeline analogy, Rick, we need to be doing that in the church. So this isn't just for the, quote, old guys or the middle-aged. This is for all of us. And as Chris alluded to this morning, this, if anything, I'd like us to get rid of the labels, quite frankly, folks. We are all human beings. We are followers of Christ. We're a family. And it's very interesting just this morning how the service is set up. So I invite you to think about leadership from the perspective of Christ led the 12, right? He wasn't just God. He was a leader and still leads us through prayer and through the church. Moses, he led. He got the call at about 80, right? If my math is right and what I understand, right? The burning bush. Am I right on that, Rick? Mm-hmm. Okay. You gotta be right when you're talking to the pastor. And so that to me speaks of elders. Then I was reminded of Timothy, where Paul called him, and I was just looking in 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy this morning, and I would encourage those of you that are younger to read those two books. They're very short this week if you're considering being a leader in this church or developing your leadership skills within the context of the church, because Paul talks to Timothy as a son, but not only that, as someone who loves him and is developing him because God had his hand on him, was calling him. So there's a couple of biblical examples, but really, when we talk about a leadership pipeline, as Rick just alluded to, it's identifying various leadership styles. It is not that chest-beating, hair flying in the wind kind of leadership that Hollywood makes out. There's quiet leadership. That may be you. There are people that support. There are leaders that come alongside. How many of you have ever led someone to Christ? Okay, just put your hand up. Who's led someone to Christ? Okay? Good portion of you. You were leaders. Think about that. You go, oh, no, I was just his friend. No, you were leading. I want you to think about that. We often don't realize how we are leading and where we are leading. But you, my friends, and I have all been called to lead. So this is an invitation for next Saturday to come explore what leadership is. To just, if you're remotely interested and want to learn more, attend. We're going to talk about what leadership looks like, what followers want, who followers want to follow, maybe a better way to put it. And we're going to have some resource material and some ideas that you can then take and maybe use amongst your family and your friends and your discipleship group. And then we're going to have a second session in November where we're going to go a little bit deeper. So if you're interested, just let us know. If you have any questions, talk to Rick or me. And
I think that's probably enough there, Ralph. Yes,
so.
As you can tell, Ralph is very passionate about this area, and I feel blessed as a church that you want to use your marketplace experience here to bless us. as a congregation and help us to grow up leaders within our midst here and develop this leadership pipeline. So thanks, Ralph, for that.